I did see a question in the chat about the EWP program, and I said it really does vary state by state. So it's driven really by what the state con determines to be the priorities of the state, and also you're balancing resources, personnel, and monies and time between various programs. And at least what I've observed is, Farm Bill work is the primary bread and butter for our agency now. So some places, some states may offer EWP fairly regularly, and others may not. In North Carolina, we made a big push to do it in 2018. A lot of that was just political pressure and needs of the state. So, but it's really up to your state conservationist how it develops. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for my second presentation, which is about the PDM20 form. And I believe in the chat, I believe I dropped in our North Carolina version of the damage survey report, the form that's associated with it. It's a two-step process for us. We have the field analysis, field visit, and filling out the forms, and then we take those forms and enter them into the EWP tool, which is a platform that our headquarters uses to get the DSRs from us to them for their evaluation and potential, looking at them for potential funding if it's available. So let's see. So let me just shut my door here. Well, I could educate the rest of my colleagues about EWP as well. Let's see. So EWP PDM20 form, and that's just the number put at the top. Program. I can't remember what PDM stands for right now, but it summarizes several forms that make up a complete damage survey report. So integrates several documents, but there are also several documents we require to be included with it. It's detail oriented. So in North Carolina, we use this NC specific fillable version. And as I mentioned, we take that information and then transfer it over to the EWP tool for submittal at the headquarters. We also have additional pages for photos that should be utilized for photographic documentation, because as a program manager, I'm not seeing every site in the field. I think it's a good idea for the program manager, whoever that, it's kind of Linwood and Govinda for South Carolina, but it is good for the program manager to get out to the field early on to just make sure things are headed in the right direction. But like in North Carolina, I don't have any plans for that. There would be no place for me to stay. Their basic services aren't restored, and it could be more of a hassle and just getting in the way than really being helpful in doing things remotely. So, but you do need to photograph stuff, because as an outside reviewers are going to see this document. They want to be able to understand what's going on. And especially at national, if they don't understand stuff or they have questions, they will come back and say, what's going on here, and need additional detail to kind of provide that additional background, tell the story, as you might say. It does summarize, as we just segued from the last presentation, the 9-step conservation planning process. So again, just in a form. If we look at the form itself, I'm sorry about the size here. Let me see, can I zoom in? Yeah, I can. So the first page is very basic information. There's some stuff dealing with the DSR number and the project number. For every disaster event that that may qualify for EWP, program managers submit an emergency disaster report to our headquarters. And if they think it does, then they'll assign it a 4-digit number. I think we might be in the 5,060s, upper 50s in South Carolina. We're like 4,060, somewhere in there for ours. And then and then there's several components to that number. I might have a slide on that. Several, like the state, the congressional district is there, the year of the event, the disaster event number that's assigned from NHQ, and then usually a 3-digit site number, 001, starting at 001, 002 onward. And that kind of can be put into the project number. There's a little box over here for NRCS only, and this is where we document, hey, is it eligible? Yes, no. Approved? Yes, no. Funding priority, that comes from section 4. Is it a limited resource area? That affects some of our cost share sometimes. And then also, what kind of declaration is it? With EWP, it is flexible enough so that if a severe thunderstorm impacts like one community in a state, if EWP is active in your state, the state conservationist can declare, yeah, this is an EWP event, submit an EDR. It could get approved at headquarters. There's no guarantee there'll be any funding necessarily for the damages, but it can be applied to that. It doesn't have to be a national disaster or a FEMA declared disaster. So next part is dealing with the sponsor. This is a very important part, especially in North Carolina, because we use the locally led agreement. We could not do federal contracts if we wanted to in North Carolina. We just do not have the resources or asset to do that. And I encourage South Carolina to go that same route. Sponsor name, you'd want to have their point of contact with the kind of the emergency response, or who's looking over it with the sponsor. Person to contact, their address for correspondence purposes, or telephone number. Faxes have kind of gone out in history, so you don't have to fill stuff in there. Basic sponsor information. And then there is also information as far as the site itself. So I believe, let me scroll down here. Yeah, cover a little bit. That's just okay, so here's an example of a DSR number, the state, North Carolina 37. In this case, it was in the 1st Congressional District, happened in 2020, and the event number is 5555. That's just made up, and the site itself is 111. Let's see, also in this one, let's see. So I just go through some summary. Sorry, now I can magnify some. There's a little bit on the number itself, project number, how we do it, lay it out. Let's see. Sponsor name. You can again, this is important just because in North Carolina, it's really important because we do locally led agreements. Now, section 1C, that's what I was getting to, is the site location information. There's a spot for the county, state, congressional district. There's a latitude and longitude of the site. If it's a stream reach, use your professional judgment. You can have it either at the beginning of the reach, toward the middle of the reach, towards the end of the reach, but it should be a spot that people can access and say, hey, if we go to this lat long, here we are at this DSR site. So and that's probably something you should include in the notes and in the description. But we do want to see lat long in decimal degrees. I know sometimes in our Google map or other apps we might be using to determine that, you can see lat long with degrees, minutes, and seconds. We don't accept that. It needs to be a decimal degree. And if you go up to the settings in Google Maps, you can easily change that so it displays decimal degrees. We like to see that at least to 4 places. Doesn't need to be the 19 places or 8 places. 4 places, 4 numbers after the decimal point or to the right of the decimal point are adequate. UTM coordinates, you can leave that blank. That kind of goes back to military coordinates that were used back in the day. We leave it blank. If the drainage does have a name, you can name a stream or watershed. Reach name might be an unknown tributary, UT. Otherwise, name the creek and stream as well. And then the site name, that can be a local site name. We typically like to try to be sure to have the event number and site number from section 1A included on all the documentation. Because if you just using local site names, that can get very confusing for outside reviewers that are looking at the information. So here's an example of one filled out. It does have a section for a damage description. That needs to be concise. There's, it's a fillable PDF, so it needs to be concise. And I trust South Carolina, you're using something similar. It does need to be complete. It needs to be a narrative. And within that narrative, include the event name, describe the damages and extents, and the properties under threat. So in this example, you can't read that. Let me zoom in here. Hurricane Marvin, nothing against anybody named Marvin, but that's just what they gave a date. Caused severe bank erosion on a site which is threatening 3 homes and a local street. Approximately 250 feet of bank damage. Erosion bank is 7 foot high within approximately 10 feet of home foundations. So that's pretty good. You've captured all that information that your program manager requested to be in there. Okay. Oh, and this is something. Just think about it. If you know the 6-step, great. I have a mnemonic I use to memorize that. I will share that at some later presentation if requested to. See, FEMI, IDEA, FEM. And so the 6th step would be evaluate alternatives. All right, so the PDM 20 form, section 1D is a site evaluation. That's somewhat filled in after other sections are completed. Each row does need a yes, no, and comments to justify the yes, no. There are site defensibility questions. Those questions in North Carolina, actually everywhere, refer back to the CPA 52. North Carolina, we also have an area of potential effect tool report that's generated. Those should be utilized to answer site defensibility questions in this section. And important to remember, an outside reviewer is evaluating the site forms and justifications, so we need to be complete. So here's a shot of one. Damage was a result of a natural disaster. Check yes. It says here lightning strike, could be flood, hurricane, tropical storm Helene, whatever that event is. Recovery measures would be used for runoff retardation or soil erosion prevention. Yes. It talks about decreased vegetation in the area. So it could be debris, things like that. Bank is eroding and threatening a foundation. Threat to life and property, yes. In this case, we see floodwaters increase the potential for drowning and erosion of nearby stream bank near property. Event caused a sudden impairment to the watershed. Yeah, now your conditions are conducive to flooding and erosion. Again, these all go back to eligibility questions. Was an imminent threat created? Again, document it if we're checking yes, document it if you're checking no. And then if a structural practice has been repaired twice in the past 10 years. Site defensibility, that goes back to the economic, environmental, social documentation within the 52. And then is the proposed action technically viable? And is it something that can be done economically, efficiently, so the benefits outweigh the cost? That's section 1D from PDM 20. Let's see the next section. There's a checkbox. Have all the appropriate steps been taken to ensure all segments of affected population have been informed of EWP program and possible effects? If the sponsor's getting out and about, then you can check yes on that. And oftentimes that it's an education or re-education of people, especially with private landowners and interactions with sponsors. Some sponsors will be willing to do that because those landholders may be are their tax base. And so there's a value in protecting that property or structure. And sometimes other sponsors will say, "No, we're not. We have what we want to do through EWP, and our citizens need to find another avenue for getting assistance." So let's see. The next comment is comments dealing with that report of how affected population informed about EWP really. So that's just a commenting on this checkbox up above. Part 1E, a short description of the proposed action, which really should come from the top of the CPA form, boxes M and G, or sections M and G, preferred alternative. Removal of dead standing timber, reseeding, mulching, wattles added to area, approximately 20 acres. And then another part of this particular page deals with the total cost. That comes from section 6 of our form. Total estimated construction cost. If it's not a limited resource area, then the typical cost share for between NRCS and our sponsors is 75 reimbursable on construction cost. 25% is the sponsor cost share. And some of that can be in kind, but you need to be discussing that early on when developing the agreement between NRCS and the sponsor. If it is a limited resource area, which there are some counties, I'm sure, in each state that may qualify, and I think it's 2 out of 3 criteria, you can get a waiver from our programs people so it can be a limited resource. It has to do with income, value of housing, and one other criteria I can't remember. But if it does fit that, then the cost share can be 90% federal to 10% sponsor on construction. There is some technical assistance for services and management and things like that of the grant. That's the national looks at the proposed construction cost, provides 15% of that for TA. Some of that needs to be held by the state for our salaries and overseeing stuff. And a portion of that can go to the sponsors to assist them with managing or procuring services, engineering services, things like that. North Carolina for Helene and probably Debbie will probably go 10% of that TA. There's 2 components to EWP funding: FA, which is construction, and TA, technical assistance. TA is 15% of the estimated construction. In North Carolina, we'll send 10% of that to the sponsor, and we'll keep 5% for our salaries. And equipment, I'm hoping they let us also purchase equipment with the TA funds. There's been some discussions with our M&S and finance people, but there's a potential there if equipment is needed for a particular site or number of sites. See, this is probably just verbiage on that. Yeah, proposed action, again, just be complete and concise with these comments, because outside reviewers, you should match information recorded in the 52. As far as installation costs, that comes from section 6 of the PDM 20. And just additional stuff on the same thing I said before as far as cost share. On the paper form, there is a section, and this actually occurs with our EWP tool. The program manager, state program manager reviews it and okays it, and then the state conservationist reviews it and okays it. This is all within EWP tool now. Though when I get a paper copy as program manager, I typically review it, and I just provide documentation that I've reviewed it in paper form or in the electronic format, because redundancy. Maybe the network goes down, it might be available one place and not available somewhere else. So See, section 2, I think that's page 3. There's a part there that brings up the CPA 52. We do want to be sure to be using the most up-to-date 52. For North Carolina, we do want to include a copy of the Special Environmental Concerns Report from our NC NRCS APE analysis web tool. Okay. In South Carolina, you won't have that, but we do need to have the 52. You know, for us, we allow partners to complete a 52 through Section O. However, a certified conservationist does need to review it and sign off as a responsible federal official on the 52. So it needs to be, so we get some information. So again, like I said, it's a multidisciplinary. There's multiple parts to a damage survey report. And the 52 and the APE report are two of those items for North Carolina. Section 3 deals with economic considerations. Josh Hammond had a question about that. What needs to be? Needs to be realistic and documented. And I have this little acronym here. Anyone want to guess what that means? You got to be quick. I'm not going to wait a couple of minutes for people to try to figure it out. I'll give 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Anyone want to take a guess? All right. Don't pull numbers out of your ass or out of our asses for this economic consideration. Like I said, need to be realistic and documented. And don't be fast and loose, because it's conservationists, and I have to admit, if anyone's guilty of it, I'm probably guilty of it. Just as I'm conservationists, we need to slow down and just get. Okay, I'm back. All right, the network came back up. Must have been mad that I just told everybody the answer there. Okay, there is a section on future damages. You do have to make an estimate of that if no actions are taken. And we typically see that as there's some instruction definition or a business, or is a damage dollar method. We have kind of our state method that we run with. There's a damage factor, which is a decimal, the degree of damage reduction if the proposed EWP method measures are implemented. So that's a decimal, like 10%, 50%, things like that. Business losses should be direct losses to infrastructure. Business structure may add up to a year's revenue loss as documented back to structure. So I think I did mention, and it depends, some sponsors, I remember in Rockingham with that particular business there, they were pretty prompt in working with those folks and getting us some numbers that we can include with the DSR. Hey, if that bank gives way, this percentage of the property would be affected, and it would, affect 20% of the building. And this is a dollar amount that would be affected. So work with the sponsors and owners to obtain and document amounts. There are parcel tax data that's often available for homes and businesses, showing a value of land and structure. Although, as noted, we're really interested in protecting the structure. The land is part of the protection. It's not that we don't protect the land, but the structure is what we're trying to protect. The property, as defined by the EWP program and manual. You need to have the foreign preparer's names and date it was completed, and also be sure to document in photos. So, and what my usual guide is, I kind of have a little blurb here on the bottom. Try to scale the damages to what would occur if a 2-year flood event came through. That's usually like a bank full flow for a stream. So if another bank full flow came through, the next day, the 1,000-year storm could hit again. But, we're just trying to estimate stuff. So if you say, hey, if a bank full flow came through within the next 2 years, what additional damage could that potentially cause if we don't implement some EWP measures. So, and I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb. Here's what that section actually looks like when it's filled out. So in this case, there were 4 residential homes identified. They provided a value of approximately $200,000 each. That'll really vary per neighborhood. And like I mentioned, sometimes it may be cheaper to move the structure than to actually try to stabilize the site, protect it against the imminent threat. But with those 4 structures, 4 times 200,000 is 800,000. The damage reduction if the EWP, damage potential if EWP isn't implemented is approximately 20%. So the near-term damage reduction is 0.2 times 800,000 or 160,000. There's public properties identified, James Street, 20 utility poles, 20 light streets along that 250-foot stretch. So there's a dollar value attached to those. What kind of imminent threat is there with a 2-year event? 50%, 100%, 75, and then 0.5 times 5,000 is 2,500. 100% is 1 times 24,000. So you're capturing the benefits in this section. And in addition, they have some business losses. There's a Costco building and parking lot. It might affect a very small portion, 5% of that. So 0.05 times those values. So you get the net near-term damage reduction. In this case, we've calculated as 379,000. There is another value put in here. We subtract the construction, the cost of construction from this value, and that's the net benefit. And as I mentioned earlier, it's important for EWP for that number to be positive. And the more positive it is, it's better justified that we actually invest in this site for protection. If it's breaking near even, that could raise questions with reviewers. Let's see, section 4, social considerations. These are very site-specific set of questions. Base it on the DSR, not on the entire event. We're looking at the site. We want clear and concise comments on all items checked yes. We also need preparers' names and date completed. And this can be completed as information is gathered. So here's an example of those questions. Really should make sure this fills up the screen. Sorry about that. And I can zoom in a little bit now. No. Okay, so here we go. Social consideration questions. Has there been a loss of life at this site as a result of the watershed impairment? Yes, no. If you check yes, leave a comment. Make sure it's complete, but concise. You only have so much of a space to write in. Is there a potential loss for life due to damages from the watershed impairment? Here it's checked yes, and it says portions of buildings and roadway could collapse if no action taken. That sounds reasonable. Next question is, has access to a hospital or medical facility been impaired by watershed impairment? Yes, no. If you check no, there's no need for a comment. Has the community as a whole been adversely impacted by the watershed impairment? Life and property ceases to operate in normal capacity. So I can tell you right now for Helene, for virtually all of our sites, that will be checked yes. So yeah, basic services were wiped out. Ways were disrupted, power was disrupted for the entire community. Heck, the entire community might be washed away. So if it's yes, just be sure to put a comment in there. Again, if it's a localized event, very small event, it can still be EWP determined by the state con. And if it's no, you don't have to put a comment there. It's very site specific. And the final question, is there a lack or has there been a reduction of public safety due to the watershed impairment? And here, yeah, it says hazardous fall areas adjacent to structure and roadway. So it's a yes. Name,
hey, Jim.
date, person. Yep.
So is this in reference to the like if this is a stream bank at that location failed, and because of that there was a loss of life, or is it multiple things happened, and yes, there was a loss of life in the area, um, but not due to this failure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say right here at the top it says considerations for the DSR site.
Oh, okay.
So I make it site specific. And that's where that raises an interesting question, Jeff. Remind me if we have time at the end, I can expound upon that, but I don't want to I want to continue on through the form for now. Because that goes back to how different states handle EWP. Let's see, section 5, there's a group representation information. NRCS for counties, it's really demographics. They want to know the demographics of the area. NRCS, we do have a spreadsheet and a link for completing, provides it on a county-wide basis. We like to have, in North Carolina, have the preparers follow the spreadsheet instructions. Projects can span several census blocks that will be produced by the spreadsheet that we use. And I believe Mary Wallagor prepared a recording on that, so I can find that and be sure to share that with everyone as well. And again, ask for preparers and dates. So here's an example. And if you go to regular census information, it will not have, typically it doesn't break down the demographics as finely as this, as the PDM 20 tool calls for. Okay. You might get some broad figures, but certainly not broken down into these various subgroups. And that's where the spreadsheet comes in. The spreadsheet can provide us that, but on a county-wide basis. In North Carolina, as a state program manager, I encourage us and our partners to utilize counties as our partners for our locally led agreements. And if they can work with their different municipalities and towns that are within to fold everything under with the county kind of leading the charge, that works well for locally led agreements and particularly for larger events that span multiple areas or regions. But it kind of depends on how the state wants to do it. You can also have individual towns within a county or municipalities applying for EWP assistance for their portion. And that went on for Florence. You know, we had some counties that did it, and then towns inside those counties that did it. I spoke with our emergency management folks about this a little bit this morning, and I think I did, but I know I spoke with our partners and said, you know, if we can do it under counties, that will probably be the cleanest way to do it. And so then you can just use our spreadsheet tool, fill out the numbers. But if it is for a particular town, like some towns, they're historically underserved, and you know they really it's well known. Then you can, if you do break it down, then you should provide a justification for that. And sometimes it's perfectly, you know, with our agency, there's various needs or emphasis that are placed. So, but I generally fill this on a countywide basis and run with it. Other states may not agree with that approach, but that's how we do it. This is for North Carolina, so that's section 5. See, section 6 is a very important part. Some people might argue it's the most important because it deals with the money side of things, but it is the engineering cost estimate. The event in North Carolina, we do provide an event cost guide for our people that are going out and doing site assessments for commonly applied practices. We include a conservation practice number with that. Um, but you know, a lot of our partners, especially North Carolina, have ongoing stream debris removal programs and things like that. So they could have local figures that are very up to date and known. And if that's the case, then certainly go with them. FEMA will have some information as well, although especially when we get towards structural practices, that's where for NRCS, for our engineering folks, we do have RS means access if we have people on our staff that are able and willing to develop some cost estimates, and I'll probably assign that to some of our engineers to do that. But if you are using local cost data, just note it in the section. These are, I consider these programmatic estimates, so round figures to the nearest 100 or $1,000. It makes no sense to me to have this down to the nearest dollars and cents because that's not going to be reality once this stuff hits the ground. Okay. I do include with that overall construction estimate a 10% contingency. And that's just cost of materials operations plus 10% for total installation cost. So you take your estimated construction, multiply that by 0.1, that's a line item on section 6, and then that becomes the total estimated engineer. That's the engineering cost estimate. And that's all it is. It's a programmatic estimate, but that does establish the dollar amount. That's part of the request to headquarters. So in this case, the overall measure is 600 feet of debris removal. And it's broken down below. There's mobilization and demobilization. I usually have a cost associated with the size and type of equipment. Two pieces of equipment, $15,000 each for mob and demob, $30,000 total. And that there's some of this it's an estimate. That's all I can say. I have a estimate. Typically in North Carolina, we have a estimated site estimate for erosion control. Depending on the size, there's just one lump sum, $10,000. So it must be greater. The 600 feet must be greater than that. So I have at least two different levels: $5,000 of erosion control or $10,000. And then it's CPS 326 clearing and snagging, 40-foot wide stream. We're covering both banks with that. $20 a linear foot, $12,000 total. Again, we with North Carolina, we can typically go to our partners or districts and say, hey, what's it costing and how are they breaking down debris removal? So I think I've asked our FEMA folks or our partners to give us estimates like what's the typical cost per 100 feet, per 1,000 feet, per mile, because there's usually scales up. There's scaling with construction. And so they'll be able to provide us that estimate. And then the last item you see here is contingency, 10%. All of this adds up to 52,000. So the contingency is 5,200. Add 5,200 to 52,000, and we end up with $57,200 as a cost estimate for this site. Let's see what. Yeah, that's a poll question. I'm sorry. I'm thinking what part of the PDM 20 is that? That's simply a poll question. Let's see, for common mitigation standards, that are utilized for EWP. Okay, for North Carolina, clearing and snagging, that's CPS 326. That can include sediment deposits caused by the event. That's my call as a program manager and as the state conservation engineer. And there are certain advantages to that. Can discuss it with the South Carolina crew later on if you want. There is another practice called obstruction removal. That's specifically for non-riparian or areas not in or around water. It could be streams or lakes or ponds. And that can happen like with tornadoes. So if it's that kind of thing, not in a riparian area, you could utilize CPS 500 for debris removal. If it's primarily the woods, then we do have an ECS practice, woody residue treatment. That's 384, CPS 384. And again, with any conservation practice standard, we want to be looking at the definition, where it applies, and how to apply it. Those first three sections of a conservation practice standard are the most important. For sediment removal, there is open channel, but that involves CPS 582. That'll be a determination between the program manager and the state conservation engineer. Your state is looking at reorganizing, the EWP program manager can be a program manager. They don't need to be a technical person, but there definitely need to be technical people in the loop. Manager does not necessarily need to be an engineer. I try to tell my state conservationists that none of them have listened, although Texas, they did do it that way. So proud to say that as an honorary Texan. So, but there is, if you read through the standard, it's engineering. There's some pretty intensive engineering that needs to happen. And for many of our sites, for storm-related deposits, I that's why I utilize 320. Do open channel. Right. I need to giving you guys too many breaks. Come on, toughen up. Let's see. Next is the stream bank stabilization and restoration practices, stream bank and shoreline protection, CPS 580, potentially dike and levee repair, very site specific, CPS 356. A lot of times in our states, these dikes and levees already belong to the Corps of Engineers, so we don't want to touch them in that case. But if there are some sort of one put in by a local municipality or something like that years ago, and they've maintained it, I've been in meetings where the structure wasn't maintained and actually decimated by the local population, and then they called us in after an event and said, "Hey, we need help with this," and we're like, you need to maintain it. That's part of the deal if we build it for you. So that's CPS 356. But you always ask the question, does the situation fit the CPS's, the conservation practice standards, definition and purpose? See, for gully and erosion. Oh, yep.
Hey, I just had a question on 326. Does that still require engineering debris removal?
It does not. If for North Carolina, John, it does not require a PE seal. You still have to follow NRCS engineering job approval authority, doing it and approving it, but it doesn't require a PE seal necessarily. But the plan needs to be complete. So for North Carolinians, refer to the standard, also refer to the statement of work. And our standard drawings actually contain the basic information on that for 326. But for gully and erosion repair, common conservation practice standards 410, grade stabilization structure, lined waterway or outlet 468, precision landforming. This is a little bit dated. That's 462. Precision landforming and land smoothing is what it is now. There's a potential land reclamation, landslide treatment, 453. That's a little bit, that'll be very site by site. We do have our geologist, Zach Butler, can be called out to provide assistance with that. But that's going to be something that sponsors really going to need to have the capabilities to do from the engineering side. So they just need to be prepared for that from their TA, what they need to contribute from a technical assistance side of things. No more land smoothing, that went away, so that's out. In fact, I can delete that right now. Structure for water control, CPS 587. Listen, if we're doing any work on access roads and things like that, which we can't do through EWP, but I've seen this so many times across the nation, be sure to be thinking about drainage if you're and when we're visiting folks and if their roads washed out, try to be looking at what really caused it. Look upstream and uphill and find out what needs to happen for that not to happen again. But again, there are other pieces that can fit under EWP 587 for water control. Spoil spreading, mulching, CPS 484, and the critical area planning, particularly if there's construction, soil disturbances involved. So getting back to the form itself, section 7, there's several sections. Actually, this might be good to just look at the section itself. Zoom in a little bit. So this is section 7. Is an exigent situation. Typically, this will almost always be checked no. This is very site specific, and we have actual experience with trying to utilize this in Florence, where we said, yes, this is an exigent situation. The sponsor had to lead the effort, and it took them 6 months to get all the legalities and liability issues taken care of. So, and it was 9 months after the event happened that finally stuff happened on the ground. And at that point, as program manager, I just said, we're not doing exigent, but you can always, if you don't ask, it won't happen. You can always ask, but it's really the sponsor needs to have everything lined up in order for that to happen. I'd much rather in my observations thus far, in my experience, it doesn't happen unless a sponsor has contractors on retainer that are ready to move right away. All the procurement stuff is already taken care of. Then it's a potential. So just keep it. I'd say keep it in your back pocket. The second question is a site where there is a serious but not immediate threat to human life? And that's a yes, no. And all these questions go back to ranking. It helps our national folks because our EWP fund pool is always limited. If they get a slew of DSRs from all over the U.S., from several states that have been impacted by Helene, they'll start looking at how can we distribute the number, because they're pretty good about getting number to any state that requests, getting funding to any state that requests. But then as those requests grow, they need to start looking at how does it rank. So the second ranking question here is there a serious but not immediate threat to human life? Yes, no. That should be documented earlier in the DSR if you check yes. Is this a site where a building, utilities, or other important infrastructure components are threatened? Again, if you check it yes, should be documented early on. And then is this a site, is this site a funding priority established by the NRCS chief? That'll be very specific. Our state conservationist will obviously know if that's the case, and he will communicate that to our folks completing the damage survey report. But I've not seen that situation yet. So it's typically checked no. You have modifiers for these rankers, so that's 1 through 4. A vast majority of our sites ranked or have a 2 or 3 check, number 2 or number 3. And then they have these modifiers A through F. And each of these modifiers, you just read through them. Do they apply to a particular site or not? Will the proposed action or alternative protect or conserve federally listed, threatened, or endangered species? If it does, check it. If it doesn't, don't check it. Will the proposed action or alternative protect or conserve cultural sites listed on a National Register of Historic Places? If it does, check it. If it doesn't, leave it blank. Will the proposed action protect or conserve prime or important farmland? There needs to be a structure, infrastructure that's also being protected, but be farmland behind that or beside that. Will the proposed action protect or conserve existing wetlands? That's another modifier. Will the proposed action maintain or improve current water quality conditions? That's typically checked, especially if we're working in a riparian area. And with debris removal, hey, if you're removing trash and hazardous materials from a waterway, well, then you're improving the current water quality. And then finally, will the proposed action protect or conserve unique habitat, including but not limited to areas inhabited by state listed species, fish, wildlife management? North Carolina, we have Hellbender Initiative, got a trout streams, things like that. Sensitive habitat. Again, should be documented. This should really be documented in the 52. It better be documented in the 52 if we check that. Let's see. So that kind of fills it out. You can add remarks, but typically there aren't remarks in this section. And then we get down to the final sections. There's a NEPA finding from section that's covered in section 8. Enter the NEPA compliance finding, section Q of the 52. Sometimes this needs to be determined later after the site assessment. There might be additional consultations. But at some point, this needs to be resolved just for NRCS's NEPA requirements. And you put that statement from the 52 there. The DSR does need to be reviewed with our sponsors. So that has to be checked, yes, and the person that did that and their title needs to be, and that should be, look, it can't be another partner, it has to be an NRCF representative. So again, I'll as program manager, I started out, I'd not been a program manager before when Florence hit. I've learned a lot from you all and for different events. So I'll do my best. I have a few responsibilities as state engineer, but I suspect EWP will be a constant in my life for the next few years. So, and I accept that as the state engineer, and and program manager. I'll do my best to improve on my past performances. Let's see, findings. That's copy NEPA compliance, the FMA 52. As I mentioned, needs to be reviewed with the sponsor, with the DSR in its entirety. That includes all the other forms and things, because the 52 should also identify potential permits and things like that may be required. And we do need, if our partners are filling these out, especially for NRCS in North Carolina, for NRCS in North Carolina, if our partners are filling this out, then the primary partner or partner, their names, and where they're from need to be documented somewhere so they can get reimbursed for that work. And we have that on our standard operating procedures. Section 9 are attachments that need to be, we're almost there. Section 9 are attachments that are required for North Carolina's PDM 20 or DSRs, damage survey report. We need to have an aerial photo or map with extent of damages clearly marked and labeled. There needs to be a location map that shows roads to the site so that someone who's not familiar with the site can get to it. Okay? Find it. Okay. I know we have lat long and all of that, but I still carry on atlases in my car because sometimes the internet is not available. What do you know? Okay. For our cultural resources review, this should be very similar. This should be similar because this is part of Jim Arante's legacy. Is we do want to have a completed cultural resource review form with the 1 to 24,000 scale map and the APE marked out on that map. And again, with some of our sites, so experience has told us that, if we're not sure the APE, we want to be liberal with defining our APE so we don't necessarily hinder recovery operations. I think John can speak to that, but we want to be sure that we get the entire area of potential effect captured with the cultural resources form, especially for North Carolina and South Carolina. But and then we have the 52, the latest version of the 52, at least through section O, but then we should have the responsible federal officials reviewing that as well. Let's see, what do I want to add with that? Oh, and Rogelio and both, or Roger, as some of us know him as, but Rogelio Toledo and Matt Harrop, our cultural resource specialists, are preparing kind of recorded trainings on how to complete these various forms as well. So that'll be shared in the upcoming weeks. So that also needs to be part with the damage survey report. We have the special environmental concern report from NRCS's APE, area of potential effect analysis web tool. South Carolina, you guys don't have this, so this is North Carolina specific, but the report needs to be generated. I had a training from Jeremy, but I'm having Rogelio update that training and record it for us in North Carolina. We would like to see a summary printout of the census tool spreadsheet used to complete section 5. And again, that's something we'll provide. And then as always, we need to have adequate photo documentation. This FDR, that's the North Carolina specific form. I'm pretty sure for Helene and actually for much of the Tropical Storm Debbie's Tropical Cyclone 8 activities. And even if it's the tornado stuff, if our sponsors, we get sponsor requests from up there, we'll probably not use the field data report. We will just go right to damage survey reports when assessing sites. So, let's see, I won't cover it. It is a partnership with our sponsors. So, as always, the benefits need to outweigh the proposed cost. And this could get a little bit tricky, especially when we're dealing with debris removal, but we'll see how things unfold. In North Carolina, we do have a state program for our partners to utilize in stream debris removal. So we'll see how that unfolds with North Carolina, but I do want to see effort. I will provide an effort towards giving us stream bank stabilization and shoreline repairs that are efficient, but may not be to the level of some of the stuff we've done in the past, because as we see, nature wins. Even if and that's what I'd like to see, especially for North Carolina, if we do have stream restoration projects that got blown out, I'd like to know about it. But if we also have had ones, I've heard reports of ones that have held up very good. So we want reports of those too. With that information, then we'll see how we want to proceed with stream bank stabilization within Carolina. See what funding priorities are developed. What section is that? It's the number right after 6. 7, section 7. Good. There's contact information, but this is out of date. That can be deleted, moved on. There's my contact information. If there are questions or follow-ups, I'll do my best. I'll hang on after everyone leaves and print these out in the PDFs. I don't think I have that in the folder right now. And put those in the chat for everyone. Put the forms. Are there questions in the chat, Zach? Are there questions that people want to ask now? We're just about at 3 o'clock. I really appreciate everyone's patience and time. And I'll keep the recording going just because we're asking questions right now.
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat right now, and I don't see anybody's hands up either.
Yeah, it's Friday afternoon. Some of us are dealing with a lot of stuff. So prayers and thoughts are with everyone. Have a safe weekend. And we say, well, they used to say in South Texas, via con Dios, everyone, okay?
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Stop recording.